We will chill all the guns of the foe and still get ready. Airborne from skies of blue, heading the goal. We're coming, make the jumps and take your boats today. Let's go put on your boots. You're jumping.
And today on Have a Knife Day, we're here in the Emerson Knives shop inside of their facility. And lo and behold, we have Mr. Emerson himself. And I'm here to pick up a knife that I purchased a little while ago, and it's ready to come home with me like a new baby. So, Mr. Emerson, over to you.
Well, I think the knife that you're here to pick up is called the Soul Breaker. Am I right?
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
Yes, indeed.
Well, that was a fun project because one of the things that I think about is that we have so many loyal Emerson aficionados, and I think probably the cream of the crop of the aficionados and the people that collect our knives and follow us is the Emerson Knife Owners Group, EKOG. And I know that they approached me several times about doing a special knife for them, and I was always like, geez, I hope I can fit it in, and but I kept kind of pushing it to the back burner. And then one day I said, you know what? These are people that really like what we do, and they support us 100%.
Very passionate.
Yeah, in every way possible. I owe them a knife, and I owe them way more than a knife actually, but I owe them big time. And so we got together with some of the people that are the, I guess, administrators of the Emerson Knife Owners Group. And I said, so what do you want me to do? They said, well, we want you to design a knife, but could we get a couple variations so we can kind of pick and choose? And I said, that's not a problem, because one thing that I can do is design knives. And I'm not saying I'm the world's best knife designer, but what I'm saying is I love to design knives. So that was an easy day. So I actually came up with about 5 different designs that I thought they gave me some parameters. They wanted a tanto type blade. They wanted it to be a certain length and a certain blade length, which that's fine, because those are the things I need to know, because I could design a knife that's this big and that's not really what they're after, or I could design a little knife like that and that's not what they're after. So by them giving me these basic ideas to work into the project, I came up with about 5 different designs. And then we had the guys show up here at the right here where we are right now. We did it right here on this display case. I had the designs out, and a couple of the guys had their phones, and they had FaceTime with a couple of the other admin guys, and they were looking at all the designs, and they picked one, and I had written the name Soul Breaker on it, because when I design a knife, it's one of those weird things where maybe I just saw a movie the night before, or maybe I was reading a book about something, and so when I designed the knife, those kind of thoughts about whatever that subject matter might be is floating around in my head, and boom, I put it on the knife, and it usually sticks as the name of the knife forever at that point. I've come up with a few clinkers here and there that my wife is like, oh, Ernie, you can't call a knife that. No, geez Louise, get real. But being that I actually made some knives for some of the Navy teams over the years, one of the guys that actually was in one of the platoons that I worked with was David Goggins. And not that I know him as a personal friend, but I do know him. And of course I know of him. And he was talking one day, I was listening to a podcast, and he said something about being a soul breaker. And I was like, man, that's a powerful
Statement.
Yeah, it carries weight, and I think, our crowd, our kind of guys, the guys that carry Emerson knives, they understand what stuff like that means. And so because I had just
kind of biblical, if you're not the person who can destroy the body, but the one who can break
the soul. and the soul, of course, that's the glue that holds everything together. In both all of your morals, your ethics, your character, everything that you do, your soul is that's what makes it all happen. And so anyway, I wrote down Soul Breaker on the underneath the picture. And when the guys saw it, they said, I said, well, what do you want to name it? And they said, no, let's keep it the same name, because that's name is badass, right? And it is a badass knife too. So let me show it to you.
Because I have not yet touched that blade. I've seen it on the website, but this is my first time seeing it in person.
Well, you know, it's funny because I'm glad you said that, because one of the things that when I first started making knives, I used to draw that knife out, and then I would put it on some heavier cardstock, and then I would cut it out with a pair of scissors, and I would hold it in my hand, and all this different things just to get to the point where, okay, it feels good. Because you can make a knife that looks real cool, but it's the same thing as like, I always ask people if they've ever used a machete. Because I'll tell you what, if there's one thing that'll give you blisters on your hands in 5 minutes is swinging a machete around. And one of the things that you'll notice about a machete, which I use just as an analogy for designing tactical knives when I'm talking to young knife makers and that, is there's no projections, there's no skull breakers, there's no things sticking out, there's no sharp edges, because all of that stuff will tear your hands to shreds. And so if you look at something that's a hard use tool, like a hammer, if you look at the handle of a hammer, the handle of an axe, they're all nice and smooth and contoured and everything. Well, in the old days, when I first started, I didn't have that frozen into my head, as far as I could design a knife and go, oh, that looks cool, and then pick it up and go, oh man, it's poking into the heel of my palm. That's never going to work, especially for something that's going to be used in a hard use situation. And I guess maybe from over the years of the experience of designing knives and designing knives and designing knives, I've gotten it now where I don't really even I can draw it and I can look at it and go, that's not going to be comfortable. I have to soften that curve, or I have to put a deeper choil on it, or whatever it would take. So I can kind of draw the knife now and literally build the knife just exactly like the drawing, and I know how it's going to feel while it's still some gray pencil lines on a piece of paper. It's the same thing that happened with this knife. I didn't have to do any models or anything else. I designed the knife and built it, and it fit my hand, and I just consider myself an average guy. So I figured if I could build it so that it fit the average person's grip, we would be fine. And it feels really good in the hand. So again, it sounds like I'm bragging, maybe I am, but I can design a knife.
Well, it's your baby. Everybody loves their baby.
They do. And it's funny because I can design a knife now and just go straight from drawing to actual part, and almost 99% of the time, it's exactly like the first drawing that I did. I didn't have to do any modifications to it. And so there it is. It's a chisel ground blade with the EKOG logo on one side and our Emerson skull on the other side, which kind of puts it into the Soul Breaker thing. And people wonder, let me digress on that for a moment. If you look at military insignia throughout the world, there is a high percentage of military insignia that features a skull. Why? Well, the real reason for that is that skull represents, I can wear a skull because I am not scared of death. And so, for example, and it goes all the way back through history. The fact that you would have a skull insignia, it signifies that I do not fear death and I'm willing to die for my cause. And so you'll see it all over from, think of the Marine Raiders, and think of, unfortunately, it was also used by some bad guys, but nonetheless, the insignia is found.
Like memento mori.
I'm so sorry?
Memento mori.
Yes.
We see death, we understand that it's a possibility, and if anything, military dark humor and appreciation of life is also an understanding of death.
Yes, 100%. And to know that what you do may result in either the death of a dear friend or comrade, a brother at arms, or yourself, but you're still willing to go out and tackle that job, that assignment, that mission, is really, you need all the support you can get sometimes. But those things like your insignia, the pride that you have in the unit that you serve in, it's funny how that skull has found its way into a lot of those. So our skull represents that same feeling. When I first started our company, that Emerson skull was what I wanted to have on the knives, because at that time I was making a lot of them for the U.S. military, and I knew they would appreciate that and understand what it was. So that's a little bit of the history of the Emerson skull.
You mind if I
go right ahead, sir?
Okay. So it's light. Mm-hmm. You're not going to get fatigued from carrying this. It's surprisingly light, and it has that great classic Emerson G10. You can always tell an Emerson person by looking at their pocket. Because I have my jeans. Let's see if I can. Come on, my God. There we go. See, I do my own stunts. And it's
a stout knife.
Makes me happy.
It's strong. It's got that chisel ground blade, that tanto armor piercing point on it.
Yes.
Which, do you mind if I go into that a little bit?
Oh, yeah, I've given you the whole day.
Okay. So, when you look at, and I call this the Americanized tanto or the Emerson tanto, which is a little different than a
That's
traditional.
a heavily reinforced tanto.
It is, and it's a little different from what you would call a traditional Japanese style, which is a little bit more curved. Although they did have some that had a pretty abrupt upsweep on them. But if you think of, again, to get a little morbid, but it illustrates a point, if you look at the guillotine, okay, the guillotine is a blade and it comes down and chops. But if you look at the guillotine, it's also at an angle.
Yes.
So when it's coming down to engage the material that it engages, it's not only chopping, but it's slicing at the same time. Now, the principle is the same, and I'm sorry that I'm using that as an illustration of the point I'm trying to make.
It's a good representation.
But most people have seen a guillotine.
Yes.
And they have a
Some
mental
people should
picture
see
of
it again, but that's another side tangent.
Yeah.
We won't go down.
But when you have a point like this, the reason that I built the Emerson Tantos the way I did, and again, not so much a problem now as it might have been back in those days, because the armor has changed a little bit, but we wanted to design a point that could penetrate soft body armor and or multi-layers of clothing and things like that, because the guys that I was working with, not that they were out there necessarily using knives as tools of mass destruction, but if the case would ever go so far south and so bad that their knife was the only thing they had left, they wanted to be sure that it was going to be able to do the job that got them out of the worst job.
Knives don't run out of bullets.
They don't run out of bullets.
And well, there's a reason why Jim Bowie brought a knife to a gunfight and won, because at the end of the day, things can happen with firearms. But if you have a reliable blade,
yeah.
And if it's reliable, well, gee whiz, it's not going to fail you.
No, it isn't. And, it's funny you bring Jim Bowie up, because I just read a story, a historical account. He didn't just go out and get into a fight with a knife. I think he was also shot, and he was stabbed with a cane, with a cane sword.
Yeah.
And he still survived and used that knife to dispatch the guys that were trying to kill him. So that, I'll tell you what, those were some tough people back in those days.
They're definitely made of sterner stuff than the modern man.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I remember I used to read all these books about the Wild West and everything, and it was one of the guys that was involved in the Northfield, Minnesota raid. I think it might have been the James gang or whatever. And the people of Northfield, Minnesota knew they were coming in. And so when the bank robbers showed up, the James gang, I believe it was, all the Swedes that lived in Northfield, Minnesota were all out there with their shotguns and bird rifles and everything else. And they shot the living daylights out of them. I think several of the guys escaped. But this is a memorable quote. I've never forgotten it. I read this when I was like 12 years old. One of the guys was in the hospital, and he had been shot 13 times. And one of the pulp writers for the novels they were producing in those days was there to get his story, and he said, it might have been Cole Younger, in fact. He said, how could you be shot 13 times and still survive? And he looked at him and he just simply said, we're tough men used to tough ways. And so, anyway, I digress.
He probably rather like a maraca.
Yeah. You keep taking me off on these side roads because you got all those good stories that get me going. But back to that tanto, what we wanted was a blade so that when it contacted a material, it was also going to, the point would be driven in, it would slice, and it would chop all at the same time.
And that actually has 2 points because we have a point here and we have a point there.
Yeah. And that's another funny thing. When I don't get a real chance to talk to a lot of people about some of these small idiosyncrasies and maybe some of the nuances of some of these knives and why they are the way they are and why I design them the way they are. But when I was designing the first CQC7s and CQC6s and all of that good stuff, we were doing a lot of training, and we would use these dummies to use live blades on to hit and strike and slice and stab and all that other good stuff. And one of the things that I found out was, this is another real stout knife. But one of the things that I found out was, because I could see the wear marks from the abrasion of the knife hitting this material. We had this really hard foam that we used. And one of the things that I saw was, as the knife was being pulled across material, and I mean with a lot of force actually, because we were cutting deep, you could see the line of
the drag.
Yeah. But it swooped way up right over this point. And since you brought that point up about it there being 2 points, it cut the deepest on the blade right
that would pull
at
it
that
into
junction.
the cut.
Yeah. And that was something that I didn't know. I don't know the physics of it. I didn't even realize it until we started looking at those blades and noticed that, hey, that drag mark goes way high right at that point. So there's a concentration of force right there, which is interesting because it still leaves this whole front part nice and sharp. In other words, if someone was wearing a bunch of leather clothing as a pseudo armor, if you will, that if that knife was being dulled in any way by striking that leather or any other object, whether it's let's see, a magazine, in a pouch or anything like that, you could dull this part up or even maybe chip it, if you will, but you still had that nice sharp point and that nice sharp tanto edge if you had to actually, because again, if I may be so bold to say, and don't offend anybody, but as most of us should know, you don't die from a slash, but you die from a stab. And that's really what it's all about in a time and place where you would ever have to use a knife against another person who is trying to do you grave bodily harm. The slashing is visual and it might deter somebody, but if that person's got if he's a soul breaker and he's coming for you and not going to stop, the only way you're really going to stop him, outside of a slash to, an area where it's totally exposed to potential blood loss, is a stab wound. And that's really what's going to stop the situation. because it's a penetrating wound, and it can hit any kind of organs wherever it's placed, but we needed to have a nice sharp point that could stab and or cut, and also at that time they could use as a scraper to get barnacles and things off the ship's hull if they were going to plant some kind of a device on the hull of the ship. So that's part of the whole reason why an Emerson Tanto evolved or exists, and then evolved into what became, I guess, kind of my signature blade for Emerson knives.
Well, that's excellent.
I hope this story makes a little sense to you, because
It makes sense to me.
I start to ramble on quite a bit, but
well, people who know me, I do ramble. I'm a rambling man, and I make a lot of stops in conversations, so to speak. But it's the whole intent and purpose of doing the interviews with you is to help flesh out the object, to give it more substance. Sure, this is an implement designed to do work. Mm-hmm. And I pretty much carry everything. You can tell I have a fixed blade. I have my All-American in my pocket. But I appreciate any knife that has not, touched my heart in a certain way, has been donated and has found another pocket. Everything that I own are knives that I have an emotional tie to, and an investment and an appreciation of its design and function. And I think that comes down to a lot of the people who, we are proud to be part of the Emerson family. We appreciate the cultural heritage that you bring to it in your life experience. We see how tough they are, how resilient they are, and how they have touched the military and law enforcement and all that, and you get to carry that in your very own well-worn pocket.
Yeah. Well, you triggered another thought. We are now have been in the game long enough to have actually grandchildren inherit knives from their father and the grandfather. So one of the things that makes me very, very proud, because our knives they're meant to be used. I could make a pretty knife. In fact, way back, I made a whole bunch of pretty knives, but my heart wasn't there because I'm a tool guy. I'm a nuts and bolts, hammer and nail, chainsaw and axe guy. That's where I'm from, and that's in my soul. And so when I really understood of why I'm making knives and came to the realization, I want to make tools. I want to make things that last. And I've used this story a number of times, but it's exactly epitomizes everything that I'm all about. I have my grandfather's Est-wing hammers, and they drive a nail just as good today as they ever did. And I will give those to my son, and he'll probably give those to his grandson. And now that we are in the game for 30 years or so, I started realizing that these knives were being passed down generation to generation. And what that says to me is we made a hard use tool, and it didn't get thrown away. It didn't wear out. Yes, excuse me for 1 second. I'm gonna shut this because I hear someone talking. I realized that what we were doing didn't really have a shelf life. Now, yes, have people broken our knives? Damn straight they have. we have a box of broken blades and things that I keep because, again, they all come with a story. Believe me, some of them are
in their defense, it was a good idea when they thought of it.
Exactly, and I was like, oh my God, what were you doing with that knife? But anyway, it's a very special thing because of that same reason that I have my grandfather's hammers. I have my dad's deer rifle and shotgun, and those again will be passed on generation to generation to generation. I want those knives to actually be just exactly like that. I want them passed on from generation to generation to generation. And I've had people say, Ernie, that's not a real good business model because if you sell a guy a knife and he never has to buy another one.
But here's the pride in
I don't care.
manufacture. That's American made, tough as nails.
Damn straight.
Generational.
100%.
Something that you would be proud to pass on to a next generation.
I said many times, I said, I've never asked myself that question. I didn't build them thinking that I'm going to build a knife that wears out after a couple of years of use because I wanted you to come back and buy another knife from me. I wanted to build a tool that you can end up giving, it at least last your lifetime, so to speak. And wow, we've it's come to fruition, and now, like I said, we're having grandkids come in and go, this was my grandpa's knife. He carried it in the Gulf War, or he carried it this and that, or he used it his entire life as a lumberjack or whatever. And then my dad used it, and he was an electrician, and now he gave it on down to me. And could you sharpen it? You know, and I'm like, hell yes, I can. And generally, that's about the only thing that needs to be done. Every once in a while, we got to replace a part that's kind of worn or something. But that brings up another thing too. If you don't mind me digressing one more time.
I let the cook.
Okay, because I don't get the chance to do this very often.
Yeah.
You've kind of given me the entire.
You have the floor.
Go ahead and talk. So one of the things that I'm very, very proud of is when we started this company, I said, you know what? I want to also make a knife that you can take apart, that you can replace parts, you can fiddle with it if you're a tinker, you can modify it. Because I came out of a gun culture, 100%. In fact, my favorite pistol of all times, of course, was the 1911 because I could take it apart and then put it back together, and I could work on them, and I could change parts out and all this and that. And I said, well, why? I'm going to do that with the knives too. And with all due respect to Benchmade, when I went to Benchmade, I said, we got to make these knives so they can take them apart and do all this. I want to take apart knife. And they said, no, we can't do that because people will put them back together wrong, or they'll lose parts or whatever. And so where I'm going with this is we made the first, in the world of tactical knives, your tactical weapon has to be something that you can take apart, fix, service, modify, upgrade, and it has to be the same thing for the knives. And no other knife company on earth was doing it at the time. And the reason I brought up Benchmade was because I will have people say, well, Ernie, Benchmade was the first. You could take those knives apart. Aha! You couldn't put them back together, because what happened was when Benchmade made the knives, they put screws that went all the way through from one side into the G10 handle on the other side. The backspacers and everything were just there as backspacers, just to fill a void.
At that time, yeah.
And they screwed them into the G10. Well, here's the secret, folks. They didn't thread the G10. They didn't put a screw insert into the G10. They laser burned a hole smaller than the diameter of the screw, and then
it bulldogged itself into
yes,
it.
the screw self-threads into the softer G10, but the minute you take it apart, poof, no threads.
How long ago was that?
1994, I believe. And so I said, that ain't going to happen with Emerson knives. I want everybody to be able to take these knives apart, put them back together, because that's what a tactical weapon. See, that's the thing that a lot of people, because it's black with a gray blade or silver blade or black blade, that doesn't make it tactical. The thing that makes it tactical is what makes a weapon tactical, that it can be used in an environment under harsh conditions and still be kept in service or brought back to service. And that's the other reason too that I've always said, look, people say, hey, why aren't you making a blade that's a 62 Rockwell? Because we have super steels and all that. And I said, well, here's the thing. You got to understand something. A broken knife is no knife. A dull knife, still a knife. So I can still get life out of it, even if it's dulled up, because I can always resharpen it. But if it's too brittle, and believe me, we were dealing with people that were they were brutal. It's like the old story about the Rangers and the bowling ball. You lock them in a room for a night. Two with two bowling balls. Come back.
Oh, well, you're asking for trouble.
One's broken, one's pregnant.
Yeah, exactly. I wasn't going to go there, but I'm glad you went there first. I didn't want to steal that.
I don't
from
want
you.
to offend anybody, but that's who we're
And
dealing
the only
with.
reason why you broke it because you couldn't get pregnant. But we're lonely. What can we say?
There you go.
Things happen.
But those are the philosophies behind what I wanted to do with the knives. And those are some of the little anecdotal stories about why things are the way they are. And I'm very proud of it because now I'm telling you, you can go to any knife company on earth and they're completely dismantleable knives that you can take apart. Well, we started that and we own it and we always have. And that's something I'm very, very proud of, is some of the innovations that we've brought to the knife industry. And honest, it might sound like a little sour grapes, but we don't get credit for a lot of that stuff because bigger companies all of a sudden became, well, they're making 1 million knives a year and we're not. They become known for this particular feature and things like that. And it's like, whoa, started in my garage, folks. Honest, no BS on that. And so, when I get a chance to talk about some of this stuff, it's always a joy that, especially to the EKOG and people like that have an appreciation for all things Emerson. So,
Well, no,
really appreciate it.
If you're a member of EKOG and you don't appreciate the opportunity to sit and listen to your stories, it's a love of hearing a story that should be attached to the knife you own. And not just keeping it in a box, but carrying it and adding your story to the knife. Go out there, and I know some of these knives are pretty, but the joy is in the carrying, not just the possessing, and going out there and writing your own story with it.
Putting them through their tests, man. That to me is that's the joy of what I do.
To be used.
Yeah, they're meant to be used.
Yeah.
And we've seen some that have been used, believe me.
Oh, I had a knife in my pocket, and I'm like, well, maybe I need to separate this electrical cord so I can get something through it. And then, lo and behold, Uncle Sparky adds some personality to a knife, and I'm like, well, that wasn't the smartest or shining moment, but gee whiz, a knife at the end of the day is a tool.
It is a tool. In fact, it's mankind's oldest tool.
Very, very
honest
true.
to gosh. Yep.
Very, very true. And it's part of I love warrior culture.
Oh yeah.
And when you see America and every culture that has come into the Union has added its own spice into the melting pot that we are.
100%.
I think about the Green Berets, the Special Forces, the V-42 fighting knife with the 2 cross arrows.
Yeah.
The cross arrows are a nod to our Native American scout heritage. Our longest war was with the Native American, the indigenous people of this land. You cannot, it's already baked into the biscuit. America learned its most by that, the good and the bad of it. Going forward, I would rather see it incorporated in as something to increase us as a people, something that should be appreciated and cherished and honored. And and here are our knives, the Spanish notches, the Arkansas toothpick, the tantos, the American tantos, all part of our blade heritage and our warrior culture.
Yep.
And what is the best knife? It's the one that you have in your pocket at that time. What is your favorite one?
100%.
Oh, probably the next one I buy. And all the other knives are, looking back at me going like, really? And I'm like, yeah, totally. And I always look forward to getting that email, of seeing that picture in EKOG. And I always look forward to my next Emerson knife because I know it'll be my next favorite knife.
Well, thank you very much. That's a supreme compliment.
And just to let you see it here, because I am getting ready for a trip. So this is what we're looking at. This is something I've been waiting for. and everything just lined up for the moment to come over here, and you should have heard what was not on the video. And it's just because it's an honest appreciation of where we are now and how we got here. And with that, Mr. Emerson, we thank you so much for spending time here with us today.
Oh,
and as
gosh,
always, have a nice day.
Thank you.
And welcome to the Have a Nice Day tailgate. Just got back from Harbor City, where the Emerson facility is. What a great opportunity to have an interview with Mr. Ernest Emerson. Now, the soul breaker that you saw in the video was on his table and does not have a serial number. And the opportunity let him tell the story of how people got together and designed this knife is a great story to know. So this is my soul breaker. This is number 9 out of 263, Magna Cut blade. And I'm going to put the specifications up for you so you can see that. This is a great knife, fits great in the hand, super grippy G10, great tanto blade, reinforced as it is. And I'm happy. I am so very happy, and I'm looking forward to the next knife that is designed by the Emerson family. Well, thank you so much for spending time here with me today. I hope you enjoyed the journey. Please remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And as always, have a nice day.
And fight, we will, and perish.